How is AI changing QA? Well, AI has got a real big problem with hallucination. And as a software engineer, I've always felt like my QA team hallucinates and finds problems in my code that don't really exist. So AI sounds perfect for QA. We're going to talk more about it today on Product Driven with a founder of an automated QA program called Nuwan. Check out today's episode. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. And we're back for another episode of Product Driven. This is your host, Matt Watson. Very excited today to be joined by Nuwan, who is the founder and CEO of a company called TestChimp. We want to talk today about generative AI and how it's impacting testing. We hear a lot about how it's impacting coding and all sorts of different things in life. I'm using it to even help me write a book. You can check out the Product Driven book at productdriven.com. It was very helpful for that. Still need a human in the loop. It doesn't do all the work. You still got to be smarter than the AI. But how does that work for QA? So, Nuwan, welcome to the show, man. And tell us a little more about TestChimp and why you guys started that to help bring AI to the QA world.
Yeah, hey, Matt, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I think everybody knows that GenAI is like sort of revolutionizing every aspect of our lives nowadays. And one area where I think where the biggest impact we're seeing with GenAI is in coding. So you see a whole, like I don't code anymore by myself. I just ask ChatGPT, sort of vibe coding to do our coding, and then I take the code and I look at it and edit stuff and then use it.
You still got
Um,
to be smart in the code.
yeah, for sure. But I think it's like it's not because I can't code, but because I like it can quickly code stuff, but then at the end of the day you have to like verify stuff.
But then the
And
key is you got to have the product vision for like what you're trying to build, right? Like if you know what we're trying to build, then it's easy to be like, okay, fix this thing one step at a time, add this thing one step at a time, right? And just kind
yeah,
of keep iterating through it one little piece at a time. I think where people are crazy is the ones that think like, I don't even need to know how to write code. I'm just going to talk to my computer and like all this magic is going to happen and I'm going to have built this entire software. Where in reality, it's more like what you're doing. It's like, hey, I know what needs to be done. I know what good code looks like. I can work through it step by
yeah,
step.
yeah. Yeah, and I think so that's one so where we see like people like us who used to code full time is now like handing off a little bit of that to GenAI, and then you have platforms like Lovable, Hayballs, and Bolt, etc., where you can actually build the entire app. As you mentioned, like
Yeah.
it's pretty POC, I would say, but to get started. And then now we see like a whole heap of people who did not code at all also coming into coding. And overall, what's happening is that because of GenAI, like there's so much code being produced and software being built on a daily basis, then in an unprecedented speed that it was never the case. So the downside though is that GenAI, while it's like super fast, it hallucinates a lot as well. So like can't remember off the top of my head what the stat was like, but I think some like 40% or something of hallucinations was recorded with these GenAI coding solutions. So what it
But
means
that
is
that
that
sounds perfect for QA because all engineers think the entire QA department is always hallucinating, right?
yeah, so I think that that's a good point, and that sort of is the reason why we sort of jumped into the testing domain as well, because I think because like, if you think about like 5 6 years ago, before all of this, coding was like the bottleneck of like SDLC. Like what
Yeah.
took the biggest chunk of time was like building the thing, and you have like going to like Stack Overflow and like figure out bits and pieces from there, and took a lot of time. But now things are being produced so fast, like be it by people who don't code, like people who used to code, um, and now the bottleneck has transformed from like from the development side to okay, let's make sure that this does not break. Like the output that these AI solutions are creating are actually valid and what we wanted. So now testing is becoming the new bottleneck.
People
Um,
actually test their code?
yeah, I think there's like concept like testing in production.
I thought we
um,
just went straight to production. Well, I think you're right about the bottleneck is moving, and in my book, the product driven book, it's one thing I talk about a lot is the product. Used to be how long it took software engineers to build something took forever, right? Like software engineering was a very slow process, and honestly, a lot of the things that we built in the development lifecycle of software engineering was to make software engineering more efficient, like more tools, different practices, agile, DevOps, all these different things, was trying to make the engineering part of this more productive and could get done quicker. But as you've just pointed out, AI has changed that, and now the bottleneck is moving. And so you're right. Now, I refer in the book about how the bottleneck, a lot of it has moved to the product decision making part of it. Like if the developers don't know what to build, why to build it, how to build it, that's where they're going to get stuck. But you're right. QA is another very important component of this. Is like, okay, if we can engineer this very quickly, how do we test it? And honestly, there's been some software in my career that I would say the testing was more difficult than building the software, right? And that could be unit testing, it could be manual testing, it can be automated testing, it can be any kind of testing. But for example, I've worked on projects around, say, something like billing. It's like, okay, we're going to build a new billing system or whatever. Like the code could be sort of complicated, but the amount of testing to ensure that that billing is done the right way could easily be more complicated than writing the software was, right? And so
yeah.
now imagine if you're using AI to help write that code for the billing system very quickly, and man, if AI could do that, that would be great because some software like that is a nightmare to build. But now we're at the bottleneck of like, how do I test my new billing system, right? Like we need a lot of very robust testing to ensure that we bill people the right way. And so now all of a sudden we're at a new bottleneck. How do we
Exactly.
test our software, right?
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. The fact that in some cases, like testing is the harder thing because,
Yeah.
like, yeah, like imagine like let's say you have a text box and there's a search function and there's so many different things that you need to try it out with when you're testing. So like you'd have like input uh, garbage values and like, see what happens. And what if you just leave it empty and like try to submit it? Or there's so many different edge cases and things to think about, like that usually, as a developer myself, we sort of are pretty optimistic people when it comes to like development side. We always think of the happy part and we forget about all of the edge cases that we have to think
And we're
about, or
very
like
pessimistic about the QA team.
yeah, and I think on the other hand, like the QAs have to like put on a very pessimistic hat because like they have
Yeah.
to think about all the ways things can break.
They're not
Um,
very nice and happy people for sure.
but that also means that like there's so many variations of like very mundane things that you have to do. Like you have to try out hundreds of different combinations of. I was talking about just one text box, right? So imagine like the more complicated the system gets and the more complicated the interrelationships between these components, the more variations that you have to try out, and this becomes like a nightmare if you were to do it like manually. Like we see all sort of like very bloated teams where you have 20, 30 QA engineers simply because you keep on adding new features and then you have to like keep on testing all of those scenarios. um, and this is like ripe for like disruption using Gen AI and like AI adoption because a lot of those because one thing that AI is good at is that it can execute much faster. So all of those variations that we were talking about, that is where AI can definitely help out. At least in like,
But
sorry, go ahead.
but let's dig into that for a minute because one of the things we know about software development is it needs to be very deterministic. It needs to be very predictable, right? The last thing I want in my code for my new billing system is like I wrote the code with AI, but then like there's not like deterministic code on the other side and like all of a sudden the code could change or something, right? Like so we want to use AI and then the output is code that we can depend on that is predictable. So as we think about QA, I mean, somebody out there is probably selling this world where like, oh, you have an AI agent that does QA for you, and you just give it a prompt of like, go test my search box, like you're describing. But is that deterministic? Is it predictable? Is it trustable? Or is every single time that this QA agent runs, like it can interpret it in a different way, or somebody updates the LLM model and all of a sudden it just does things differently, right? Like I think anybody who works in software engineering wants predictability. Like we don't want to use AI prompts that like shit just magically happens and things could change and things could break and we don't understand why. Like it's not predictable. It's not trustable for us. I mean, maybe in the future that changes, but for myself, like I want it to be very, very predictable, right? So, but then the challenge is for what you guys do, how do you make it adaptable, right? If somebody changes this search box, they change the CSS or the JavaScript IDs, or they move it around on the page, or so you guys are in this difficult balance of like, okay, we need software and testing that's predictable, but we also need it to be like self-healing and have some flexibility. Like what are your thoughts on this part of it?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question because, yeah, so the problem with using AI in testing is exactly what you mentioned, like how to, because before, so you build the product and then the keyword testing is essentially the last guardrail that you have before it reaches the real users, right? And imagine like you push the product to production because some AI agent said everything is okay, and it hallucinated, let's say, like it just
Yeah.
thought, it has its own mind, and it thought like, oh, it's everything is okay, and that's the worst case scenario. And in testing, you just cannot afford that. The consequences can be fairly, chaotic. Um, and I think that is where a lot of criticism is coming in as well, because if you look at the historically we had like manual testing and then the scripted testing, and the arguments for scripted testing was that you can always inspect the script and you know exactly what's going to be run. So they're very scalable and they're deterministic execution. Um, and it's very fast, unlike say manual testing. But on the other hand, scripting, the problem is that it's harder to author them. It takes time and skill. And anybody who has written US scripts would know that they always break. So there's like the big issue of like flakiness of tests. And so which is why people are gravitating towards like, okay, let's just do it manually. But on the other hand, now AI agents are coming in and they are pretty good at adapting. But what it also means is that they can adapt to the bug of your system as well, which kind of beats the entire
This new
purpose.
bug is just normal.
Yeah,
Ship to production.
exactly. So as an example, like
Based
think
on
about
your
like,
trends and history, you normally add a lot of bugs, so this seems normal, let it go.
yeah, I mean, so think of like, if there was a button that used to like work with like one click, and now it requires like two clicks, an AI agent would like, AI agents are like optimized to like get things working. So what they would do is like they would like click twice and then proceed to the next step, and that right there, what happened was a bug was circumvented, like a bug was noticed but not escalated. So that's sort of one big problem. So the adapting, so too much adaptability of AI agents, and the other is that they can hallucinate, and like they could think that okay, everything is fine. And the third issue is that you can't edit stuff. Like imagine, let's say you have an English prompt of okay, test this functionality, and it'll go on and like do something on its own. And let's say it didn't do exactly what you intended it to do. Now there's no easy way of like specifying, no, don't do that, do this thing. You have to like keep on iterating on your prompt and like the English description, but even then there's no certainty, as you explained. There's no certainty in terms of like what gets executed. So this is sort of like the balance we're trying to build with like testing, in a sense. In a nutshell, it's like where we see AI adoption is not in AI at runtime of the test, but rather at the author time of the test. So so basically think of like, so what we do essentially is that we install SDKs and Chrome extensions that watches your manual testers. So you get the easy execution of a manual testing session, but then So kind of like think about like an AI agent that watches what their human testers are doing and then writes the script for that. So it basically authors the test script for you in plain playwright. So what it means is that the output you can then go in and verify and check, okay, is this what I wanted? And then you can edit them and then you have the full control. Um, but then the second pain point we were noticing with scripting was that they break often. With every single minor UI change that you do, the test breaks. And this is why sort of the AI agents are kind of nice because they adapt. But as we mentioned, like you can adapt in the wrong way as well. So what the stance we took was, okay, we're not going to do auto healing tests. What we're going to do is that we're going to do repairing of tests. So basically, one way we're using AI agents is, so always the script runs. The default is the script runs. And then if the script breaks, if and when it breaks, then an AI agent can jump in and look at the screen, what has happened. And it might say that, it used to be the login button, now it's the sign in button, but it's semantically the same thing. So I'm going to change the script to say, okay, change the locator to be different. And then it
And I
updates
think
the
AI
stack.
is probably really good at that kind of stuff, right? Being able to help identify
Yeah,
what the suggested fix is.
yeah. So I think it's sort of where we say it's more of like a recommendation role rather than uh, the execution role. So basically, what it'll do is like it'll come up with a fixed script, an updated script. But again, it's the difference between auto healing and then repaired one is that with the repaired one, you get the new script. So the test failed. If the script failed, the test failed. But separately, you get an updated script, and it'll say like these are all the changes that I had to do to get the test working. But now it's your call to go through the changes. I will show you what the changes are, but it's your call to say whether this represents a bug or not.
Yeah.
So
Let me
that sort of gives the balance.
let me ask you this. How do you feel about using AI as a guide of like what even to test? Or maybe there's a different mode of like you figuring out, okay, what is the critical path of things I should test, and AI can help me build the test for that, versus trying to replace sort of manual testing where maybe you don't need to set it up and automate it to run every day, but maybe you'd want to do it once in a while. So let me give you an example. So you talked about your search box earlier. It makes sense to have automated testing of like, okay, if I search for this thing, I get these kind of results. But you also have to worry about, well, what if they type in a search string that is too long? Or what happens if they leave the search blank? Or what happens if they type in Chinese characters and our software isn't designed for non-Latin characters or whatever? And when you get into QA, you get into like all these wild, weird scenarios. Like if you really want to test like every field on a screen of like, I typed something too long, I didn't fill it in, like all this kind of stuff. But it seems really stupid to kind of build automated QA around every single one of those possible things. But is there a way that somebody could use automated QA or use your product to do that kind of testing? And maybe we should call that like a monkey testing or something. I don't know. Like it's like
Actually,
trying to break
that is the
UI.
right technical term, by the way. There is a
Yeah,
thing called monkey testing, which
yeah.
is exactly what you mentioned. I think it's a really good terminology because, like, when you think about monkey testing, that's exactly what it means. So it's like,
Trying every way possible to break this with
yeah,
stupid ways that you can break things.
just
Granted,
do random
and
stuff and see what happens.
And granted, as the software developer that gets this bug ticket of like, our software doesn't work when you type in Chinese characters, I'm like, I don't care. Like, our software isn't designed for Chinese
Yeah.
characters. Like, we don't care. Now, granted, for some clients and some types of software, they do care, and that would be important. But I've definitely had that in my career, right? You get this bug, and you're like, why are you telling me it doesn't work with Chinese characters? Like, what? Who cares, right? But it also doesn't work with just other forms of Unicode. So it's like, even though we don't support Chinese, it's like, well, somebody put an emoji in there. And that's also a Unicode character, even though it's not a Chinese character. It breaks it, right? Like, these are all the weird things you have to deal with when you get into QA. So I guess my question is, like, is there a world where it makes sense to use automated QA to, like, purposely do that, but you don't need to, like, set that up and automate it on a daily
Yeah.
basis?
Yeah, I think so. So one is like the authoring part, which we were talking about, And the other, I think the interesting use case is like what you're mentioning is what we call exploratory testing.
Yeah.
So that's where AI agents can be quite useful, and that is also something we also have in our platform. So basically, like, uh, and similar to and around what you mentioned around like thinking of what to test in the first place. Like one capability which we built was like you have your user stories, and for each of those user stories, you need to think of various different scenarios to test, and that's a great place where AI can be adopted because you can easily ask it to like think of all the different things that I should have been testing about this user story. Now, unlike like putting that into ChatGPT and getting an answer, it will be like ChatGPT will say some stuff, but it won't be like very relevant because it doesn't have the context of your system. But imagine if it knew all of your user stories and all of the test scenarios that is for each of those user stories, then you can pretty much create a much bigger context of and give a better understanding of your product, and then it can come up with much more relevant test scenarios. And then you can ask it to like, okay, now that you thought of that test scenario, now go ahead and do that testing. Like for instance, you can use browser use, so any OpenAI operator or anything like that to basically automate an agent to like take that prompt and can go ahead and explore that system, and it can like flag out various things like you mentioned, and some of those I think it's like there's so much variation in like testing. Not everything needs to be like scripted. Probably business logic related stuff you would want to be scripted. Your critical user journeys, for instance.
Yeah.
Whereas all of those other random variations that you want to try out, probably exploratory testing could be like a really good option. And then you, of course, if you have so that again we're like our focus is basically like how do we balance the transparency control and the autonomous capabilities that AI agents bring. So even if let's say they do an exploratory test, now you would say like, okay, this is a pretty good test that they came up with, a scenario that we should be maintaining as an automation test. Then you can easily like convert it into a script, and that's where sort of we try to differentiate in like, okay, we did the agentic test, but then you can get it as a script
So,
because
so
the problem with execution of AI agents in runtime is that apart from everything else we mentioned, it is slow because it has to do inference during runtime, and also it's expensive because you need to like watch the HTML, and it takes up quite a lot of tokens. So if you come up with if an exploratory test comes up with a scenario that is useful for like continuous testing, then you could like easily convert it into a script and then from there on just run the script. But yeah, it's about finding the balance between which ones to be explored and which ones to be automated.
you mentioned earlier browser use, and that is, some new AI stuff that's out there, right? Where it's like you're using AI that's using a web browser, and and you can tell it to do whatever you want, which sounds a lot like using Selenium and Playwright and other forms of automated testing, except it is more of a supposed like intelligent version. So in theory, it's a new kind of testing that people should be using, I think, because you're sort of dealing with like an even dumber user. You're like, if you're telling the AI like go to my screen and log in, like if it can't figure out how to do that, like you might have a problem, right? Like
Yeah.
I think that's like a new thing that people probably should consider doing more and more of. It's like the helps with the high level kind of smoke test where you almost want something as stupid as AI that is not very predictable, not very deterministic. Can it figure out how to do this in my software? Might actually be a new form of testing people should do, don't you think?
Yeah, I like we call this sort of like the UX research that we do. Like you don't tell anything about the product and you give it to a user and then like
Yeah.
observe how they use it, and then you get a lot of insight about like where they're struggling. And I think that's a really good point around like the usability bugs, finding out like where the friction points in the product. And yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting And I think that would be like very appealing to like product managers as well, I guess, given that they'd have to think about like how to like design the product and to make it not suck for all of those
Yeah.
users.
I mean, when you're building automated QA, of course, you could be like, well, click on this exact button and do this exact thing and whatever. But just curious, like, oh, well, could AI have even figured that out? Or is like your user interface kind of too complicated? It's not smart enough to figure out what any of that means. So it's just interesting to think about. Well, as we wrap up the show today, tell us a couple more minutes about TestChimp, what you guys do, what's unique about your guys' kind of offering, and maybe if somebody's listening, they, you know, if they have certain problems, maybe you guys could help them with.
Yeah, so there's a lot of companies in this space right now coming with different approaches, and I think with a lot of dev tools, obviously, it's like there's always an opinionated approach every company takes. So there's no one right or wrong way, I guess, but whatever that works for different teams. And our sort of opinionated approach is that we want to bring in balance of like the determinism of scripting, but with the autonomous capabilities of AI. So instead of using AI during runtime, predominantly, like we focus on helping out, like authoring, scripting your test scripts using AI. So basically, it's kind of like the other difference is that we observe your manual test session. So every activity that happens in your staging environment, we learn from that. Instead of depending on like product documentation and stuff like that, which usually gets out of sync with the reality. So it learns from the manual testers, and then it comes up with the test scripts for you, and then it maintains the scripts for you by repairing them when they get broken. And of course, we do exploratory testing as well, which also can be exported as scripts. So that's sort of a high-level differentiator in like.
So if I had a bunch of playwright tests today, could I bring those to your system and use them, or do I have to like re-record tests in your system?
So we are thinking of like bringing in the ability to like import your existing playwright tests as well. But where we are seeing a lot of traction is that where people are trying to get into scripting because they are seeing a lot of cost with manual testing. So they are at that phase where they're going from manual to scripting. In that, we become like a very easy, frictionless way. Like you just keep on testing, and we will on the side watch you and
So you're more of like a no-code testing solution.
Well, it's not no code in the sense that the code gets created, but then you can edit it with code or with English prompts as well. Like imagine like you have the recording and you can say like point to a button and say I want this button to be verified to be like enabled, and then you can create the code, and then the script gets updated, so you get the visibility to the script as well.
Okay, is that final script in something in like a language like Playwright or something, or what is the script language of that?
We write in natively in Playwright, and you can see so the test is like there's two versions: the English version, and you can flip it and you see the scripted version. Okay. And you can export it as Selenium or even Cypress as well. So it's
very cool. Sounds like a really cool product.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Give it a try.
Yeah, so you guys are it's testchimp.io, right?
Yep. That's us.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. If you're looking for some help with automated testing, check out Nuwan's product at testchimp.io. Thanks for being on the show today, man.
And thanks for having me here, Matt. Nice meeting you.
All right, take care. Thank you. Thanks for tuning into Product Driven today. If you're passionate about building user-centric tech products, join over 30,000 tech leaders who receive the Product Driven newsletter directly in their inbox every week. Visit fullscaleteam.com/newsletter to sign up today for our newsletter. You can also view all of our episodes on YouTube and join over 50,000 others. And please follow me, Matt Watson, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.